Ages ago I was set up, at the first before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there was no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth, before he made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limits, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master workman. So, welcome back to our study here in Proverbs chapter 8. We're looking at this section about wisdom and where was wisdom at? Where did wisdom come from? Kind of what we're talking about here. And so in the last study, we looked at the fact that wisdom is distinct but one. See that wisdom was with God, and wisdom was always with God. God always possessed wisdom. It's not like he gained wisdom at some point in eternity, which doesn't even make any sense because we're talking about timelessness, so you can't gain anything in timelessness. But there you go. So this time we're looking at the fact that wisdom is eternal. So you look at the words that are used here, and we find that that's the case. Wisdom existed before the earth, in eternity. So before God created time, wisdom existed. Because time is really one of the beginning ideas that when God created the heavens and the earth, that's when time began. So before that, there was no time. There just was or is God. It's so weird when it's so hard to describe the idea of eternity. We talk about eternity past, which doesn't make any sense either. But that helps us to understand, like, eternity past would be like eternity before creation, but then how does someone who exists in eternity, in an eternal state, in a timelessness, relate to time? I have no idea. That is completely speculation when you get to that point, because I've never been there, can't think that way, so there you go. But wisdom existed before the earth in eternity. It says at the beginning of his work, right? That's verse 22, at the beginning of his work. Beginning is also translated as first or choicest. It can have the sense of priority, which is probably at the very beginnings of his work, wisdom was already there. So wisdom preceded God's work, is what it's basically saying. That that's at the beginning of it. So at the beginning, at the priority of his work, that's when God already possessed me. So it wasn't a work that God made wisdom. It's like wisdom was already there before, and was before the very first, before the very beginning of anything, of the acts of God in the creation of this universe, of this world that we know, the reality that we know. So the word work here, as the ESV note states, is often translated as way, which includes work, but also motives. So when God did his work of creation, wisdom was there. When God did anything, the first of his acts, the first of his works, the beginning of his work, that's what we're talking about. So before his ways in this world, in this universe, wisdom was already there. And the third thing we see here is that the first of his acts of old. Now, this translation of qedem as first makes it seem as if wisdom is the first thing God created. But what it is saying is that before every act of God, from of old, there was wisdom. So the first of his acts of old, it's the priority, the before the works of before his works, that's when it was happening. Before the works of acts of old, the first of his acts, the becoming, the first thing that was before the acts of old, before he acted, was wisdom. So, if you said the first thing I ever did, and there was something before that, well, that would obviously precede everything that you did. So that's what I mean. So you have that idea here. Because, if you look, I think in the notes, it says before his ways. And so the ESV has in the upper part, you see beginning of his work. But then in the lower, in the notes, you have In the Hebrew word is actually way. So before his way, the first of his acts of old. So you have this idea of existing beforehand, right? Before he did anything, then wisdom was already there. Wisdom was before the acts of old. So from everlasting, from the beginning, even before the earth, wisdom was established. Wisdom was there. Wisdom was begotten. Wisdom existed and was eternally possessed or begotten of God. Prior to all God's works, like it talks about the depths here, before the mountains, before the fields, even before the dust. So you get that Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, before the dust was created, before the elements were made, before space happened. Before all of that, wisdom was already there. Now, that is exactly the idea that we get concerning Jesus, that Jesus is eternal. Before all the works of God, Jesus was there. Colossians 1:17 says he is before all things. He existed before everything. Right? He has the priority before all things, but he also has eternal existence. So he existed and exists before all things. John 1:2 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. So the beginning of anything, that's what we talk about in theology class. What beginning are we talking about? The beginning of anything. So anything that began, the Word, Christ, was already there. So that's the hard thing for those who believe that Jesus was a created being. It's like, yeah, but he existed before the beginning of anything. He was in the beginning. The beginning of what? Beginning of everything. So if he already existed, then he must be God himself. Because if Jesus came, he was prior. He was of, beginning of the work. He possessed me at the beginning of his work. Not I was the beginning of his work. He possessed me at the beginning of his work. The first of his acts, the prior to his acts of old. That's what we're talking about here. So, you see, Jesus is eternal. Wisdom is eternal. So you begin to see again, okay, yeah, I can see Jesus here. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So that's our study for today. And come back next. Sorry about that. I'll make you deaf. So come back next time and we'll take a look at the next section of Proverbs chapter 8.